Welcome everyone. Let me introduce you to Marigot. The name Marigot comes from the French name for the bay around which the village is located. The French called it Petit Marigot, and it is now simply called Marigot, with an English pronunciation of the T at the end. When the British took over Dominica, they renamed it Petit Marigot, Halifax Bay. But this did not last, and the name Marigot remained in use. A settlement developed around the lands of the English planter John Ware, an area of the modern village that is called Wares today. After Dominica became one of the islands of the Federation of the Leeward Islands in 1871, a number of the large English plantations in the district recruited laborers from Antigua and the Leeward Islands. Many of them settled in the village, bringing with them their Methodist and Anglican faith and their particular English Creole form of speech, which became known in Dominica as Cocoy. The bay was an important shipping place for the Northeast. By then, Marigot was the largest village in the north. Today, it is the largest banana belt. We will now share with you a few heritage sites that still exist in Marigot. Stanley O. Pringle House in Melville Hall. A number of plantation houses for the owners of Melville Hall Estate have stood on the site of this present house since the 18th century. This one was constructed in the 1930s and was designed to look over the factory yard out to sea and over the estate land. Yeah. The Governor-in-Chief of Dominica and the Windward Islands was General Robert Melville, and he bought up the entire valley to establish his sugar estate. It was after him that Melville Hall was named. The estate was one of the largest on Dominica. It produced sugar, rum, and molasses. Stanley Pringle, a former chief agriculture officer, lived in this house since 1973. But about 10 years later, he purchased the house.
It was in 1980, after 81, when I was leaving. I asked that I be sold to the remnant lot after government decided to make it into a land settlement, when the CDC gave it home. So I left the agricultural department to come back here and to develop this land settlement.
And you've been living on it ever since?
And I've been living on it ever since.
Marigot was surrounded by a number of large sugar estates such as Londonderry, Melville Hall, Governor, North End, Hatton Garden, and Concord. Old Mill Hatton Garden. Hatton Garden is an estate in the broad Pegwa Valley, which was once 300 acres in size. It was owned and named by the first English owners after a street in London called Hatton Garden. The ruins of its mill and sugar and lime factory are still occupied. The water to power the mill was channeled in a canal from the St. Mary River or Crapo Hall River. It produced sugar and rum. The water mill was in working order up to the end of the 1960s. In the 19th century, the Anderson family owned the estate. Then in the 20th century, by J.J. Musgrave and his heirs. Then by the Shillingfords, and later by the late Frobel Laville, who subdivided and sold or distributed portions of the estate. The site of the old mill and surrounding land is now owned by former Prime Minister Edison James of Marigot.
Melville Hall River. The Melville Hall River flows through the Melville Hall estate before it reaches the sea. Its catchment area is the northern slopes of Mont Dablote, and it is one of the larger rivers on Dominica. It is also one of the more healthy rivers, as much of it flows through the protected forest of the Mont Dablote National Park and the Northern Forest Reserve, so that fish life and the clarity of the river is still high. The indigenous Kalinago people call it the Cachibona River, But when the British took over Dominica in 1763, they renamed it the Clyde River after a river in Scotland. But soon it became known by the name of the estate through which it flowed. St. Mary's River. The St. Mary's River, called by the French the St. Mary River, is a tributary of the Pegua River. It is a popular washing place for villagers of Marigot. Pegua River. The Pegua River is another of the larger rivers of Dominica and has its source in the central hills of the island. It is one of the few rivers in Dominica that still carries its indigenous Kalinago name, Pegua. The Pegua and St. Mary rivers meet a short distance from the sea and bring together water from two different watersheds along the central mountains of the island. Remains of Spring Bridge on Pegua River in Hatton Garden. Before a motorable road reached the Carib territory, the road from Portsmouth stopped at Hatton Garden. From here, people had to walk down along the east coast or ride on horseback. Because their way across the river was often blocked when the river was in flood, a narrow suspension bridge or swing bridge was constructed so that people could cross. These cast concrete abutments on either side of the river supported the two steel cables on which wooden planks were placed so that people could walk across.
Old Mill within Silk Resort in Hatton Garden. This attractively designed group of buildings are not as old as they look. The site was constructed using historic materials and techniques only in the 1980s, but it looks like it could have been built 200 years earlier. The place was simply a cocoa field when a Frenchman, Marquis de Chabert, bought the land from Mr. Faubert Laville in 1982 and started to fabricate a copy of an old plantation house. Copper still. This copper still at the Silk Resort was once used to make rum on Londonderry Estate. It was moved from Londonderry to this site where it has become an historic attraction. Cane juice was put into the main boiler and this was heated by a furnace beneath it. The vapor of alcohol was then cooled in the circular coil by passing it through cold water, and then the distilled alcohol was collected at the end of the process. Old Mill in Bridgewater. The remains of some smaller sugar and lime processing factories still stand around Marigot. This old mill at Bridgewater, also called Baptiste, has its large water wheel in place connected to the rollers that crushed the juice. The wheel was powered by water from the Mantipo River. Sugarcane juice was made into syrup by boiling it in these large iron coppers, and lime juice was boiled down to concentrate them as well. The factory also made soap and oil from coconuts before commercial soap was readily available.